I have an announcement to make, Michael said, tapping his wine glass with a spoon. The conversation around my parents' crowded dinner table quieted as everyone turned toward my husband of 25 years. I watched his face carefully, noting the slight tremor in his hand, the way his eyes darted toward my sister Emily before settling somewhere above everyone's heads. My heart beat steadily, betraying none of the knowledge I'd been carrying for months. At 55, I'd learned that sometimes the greatest power comes from appearing calm when you're anything but. Lisa and I are getting divorced, he continued, his voice growing firmer. I hadn't planned to announce it this way, but since everyone's together for Dad's birthday, my mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Aunt Marie placed a hand over her heart, her eyes widening behind her glasses. My father's bushy eyebrows, now snow white at 80, drew together in confusion. There's more? Michael added, reaching across the table to take Emily's hand. Emily and I have fallen in love. We've been trying to fight it for years, but sometimes love chooses you. The shocked silence that followed was broken only by my mother's whispered, "Oh my God." All eyes turned to me, awaiting the inevitable breakdown, tears, screaming, perhaps the throwing of my mother's good china that she'd carefully arranged for Dad's birthday dinner. Instead, I nodded calmly and said, "Please, everyone, check your emails right now. I'm Lisa Miller, 55 years old, currently employed as a forensic accountant and senior partner at a major accounting firm in Seattle. My job involves tracking financial discrepancies, reconstructing evidence trails, and documenting patterns of financial misconduct. I'm good at what I do, methodical, thorough, and patient. What I wanted was simple, a loving marriage built on honesty and mutual respect. After 25 years with Michael, raising two children who are now grown and gone, I thought we had that foundation. Standing in my way were my husband Michael and my younger sister Emily, who had apparently decided that their happiness was worth sacrificing mine. The injustice wasn't just their affair. It was the elaborate deception that accompanied it. The lies told not just to me, but to our entire family. The rewriting of our shared history to justify their betrayal. The assumption that I would play the role of blindsided middle-aged wife in their carefully constructed narrative. Emails? Michael asked, confusion flickering across his face. What emails? I sent them just before dinner, I replied, pulling out my own phone. Everyone should have received them by now. Around the table, family members hesitantly reached for their phones. My cousin Robert was the first to open his email, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the contents. My mother followed, her hand flying to her mouth as she gasped for the second time that evening. What have you done? Emily hissed, her face paling as she grabbed her own phone. Michael looked increasingly uneasy, glancing between me and his still unopened email. Lisa, whatever this is, it's just documentation, I said evenly, something I'm particularly good at. As more family members opened their emails, the expressions around the table transformed from shock at the announcement to something darker. Disapproval, anger, and disappointment, directed not at me but at Michael and Emily. What none of them realized yet was that the emails they were reading contained only a fraction of the evidence I had compiled. The full depth of the betrayal was far worse than anyone at this table, except perhaps Michael and Emily, could possibly imagine. Flashback. Meeting and early marriage. Michael and I met during a charity fundraiser for the Seattle Children's Hospital 30 years ago. He was a pediatric anesthesiologist, dedicated and compassionate. I was there representing my accounting firm, which had donated financial services to the hospital. Our connection was immediate and intense. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Those early years were beautiful. We bought a craftsman bungalow in Queen Anne and spent weekends renovating it together. Michael's work schedule was demanding, but he'd always make time for us. Surprise weekend getaways, cooking elaborate Sunday breakfasts, leaving little notes in my laptop bag. I'd never felt more secure or more loved. As the years passed, we welcomed Kate and then Jason into our lives. The sleepless nights with babies, the school plays, the soccer games, we navigated it all as partners. Michael was a wonderful father, patient and involved. I scaled back my work hours during those early years, then gradually built my career back up as the children grew more independent. We were the couple our friends envied, successful in our careers, but still deeply connected to each other and devoted to our family. But something shifted when Jason left for college 5 years ago. Our house, once filled with teenage friends, music, and constant activity, fell silent. The rooms that had defined us as parents, bedrooms decorated with posters and sports trophies, became empty spaces filled with memories. I suggested we downsize, but Michael wanted to keep the family home for when the kids visit. In reality, he spent more and more time at the hospital, coming home late to eat reheated dinners alone. "It's just a tough case," he'd say. Or, "the new residents need extra guidance." I believed him because I wanted to, because after 20 years of marriage, trust was the foundation I thought we'd built. Emily's return. Emily had always been the restless one in our family, dropping out of college twice, moving between cities, and changing careers with dizzying frequency. When she moved back to Seattle 5 years ago after another failed attempt at finding herself in Chicago, I was the one who suggested she stay with us until she found her footing. Michael was hesitant at first. "Are you sure, Lisa? It might change our dynamic," he said, frowning slightly as he looked up from his medical journal. "We've just gotten used to having the house to ourselves." "She's my sister," I replied, feeling a twinge of guilt that I'd hesitated even momentarily to help her. Family helps family. What was meant to be a 2-month stay stretched into 6. Emily quickly found a job at a local art gallery, but claimed she couldn't afford Seattle's rental prices. I didn't mind. I'd always wanted to be closer to my sister, and her presence seemed to fill a gap I hadn't realized existed in our home. She was full of stories about gallery openings and interesting people, bringing energy and laughter back into our too-quiet house. I noticed that Michael started coming home earlier on nights when Emily was cooking dinner. Looking back, I see the warning signs I missed. How Michael began scheduling his shifts to coincide with my business trips. How Emily would run errands that took hours longer than they should have. How they developed inside jokes I wasn't part of, the occasional tension that would fill a room when I entered as if I had interrupted something. "You two seem to get along well," my mother commented during a family barbecue, watching Michael help Emily set up a badminton net. "Why wouldn't they?" I'd replied, genuinely puzzled. My mother shrugged. "Some men don't get along with their in-laws." "You're lucky." I was lucky, I thought. My husband and sister had become friends. Our house felt more alive with Emily's energy. If Michael sometimes seemed distant, I attributed it to work stress. If Emily occasionally watched him with a strange intensity, I dismissed it as my imagination. Even after Emily finally moved into her own apartment, she remained a constant presence in our lives. Sunday dinners, impromptu movie nights, calls for help with household repairs that apparently couldn't wait until I got home from work. "You're too trusting," my friend Carol told me once after witnessing Emily call Michael for the 3rd time during our lunch. I wouldn't let my sister get that comfortable with my husband. I had laughed it off. "Emily's just needy. Besides, it's Michael." The implication was clear. Michael would never betray me. He was too honest, too devoted, too good. If I occasionally caught him looking at an incoming text and quickly putting his phone away, I told myself not to be paranoid. If he and Emily sometimes fell silent when I entered a room, I assured myself it was coincidence. Trust, after all, was the foundation of our marriage. The discovery came by accident, as these things often do. 1 year ago, I was using Michael's iPad to organize our family photos while he was at work. I wanted to create a special album for our 25th anniversary, which was coming up in a few months. When I opened the photo app, I noticed several new albums I didn't recognize. One was simply titled E. With a sense of dread I couldn't quite explain, I tapped on it. The photos weren't explicit, but they were intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. Emily in a restaurant booth, smiling over a wine glass. Emily sitting on a park bench I didn't recognize. Emily asleep on what appeared to be a hotel pillow, her makeup smudged. My fingers moved mechanically to the messaging app. I had no intention of snooping, but something propelled me forward, as if my subconscious had been collecting clues for months and needed final confirmation. There they were, dozens of messages between Michael and Emily, explicit and unambiguous. "Last night was amazing," Emily had written just 3 days earlier. "I can't stop thinking about you." "We need to be more careful," Michael replied. "I don't want to hurt Lisa." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. The next message cut even deeper. She's so caught up in her work and so oblivious to how she's aging. Sometimes I wonder if she'd even notice if we told her. I read through the entire thread with a strange detachment, as if I were examining evidence for a case at work rather than witnessing the collapse of my 25-year marriage. The messages stretched back over 3 years of deception, carrying on right under my nose. I closed the iPad without finishing the photo album. When Michael came home that night, I searched his face for signs of the stranger I discovered, some indication that the man who kissed my forehead and asked about my day was the same one who had written those messages to my sister. But he looked exactly the same. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my quietness. "Rough day at work?" "Just tired," I replied, watching him carefully. How easily the lie came to him, how comfortably he moved through our home, our life, while maintaining this secret. Over the next few days, I found myself oscillating between numbness and devastating pain. I would wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, wondering how I had missed the signs. During daylight hours, I functioned on autopilot, going to work, making dinner, engaging in conversations that now felt scripted and hollow. I didn't confront them immediately. A part of me hoped there was an explanation, something that would make sense of the incomprehensible. Perhaps the messages were just fantasy, never acted upon. Perhaps Michael had been manipulated somehow. Perhaps I had misunderstood the context. But professional habits die hard. I began documenting, almost unconsciously at first. I noted when Michael claimed to be working late, but his location showed elsewhere. I logged accidental encounters between him and Emily that seemed too frequent to be coincidence. I matched credit card statements with hotel bookings and restaurant charges. The evidence mounted, irrefutable and heartbreaking. Not only were they having an affair, but they were extraordinarily careless about it, as if they didn't expect me to notice, or perhaps didn't care if I did. Surveillance. 2 weeks after my initial discovery, I found myself sitting in my car outside an upscale hotel downtown, watching Michael and Emily enter together. They were laughing, his hand resting intimately on the small of her back, the same gesture he'd used with me countless times over our 25 years together. I took photos mechanically, adding them to my growing file. That night, Michael came home late, claiming an emergency surgery had kept him at the hospital. I nodded, served him reheated dinner, and listened to his elaborate fiction about a child with a ruptured appendix. "You look exhausted," I said, studying the faint smudge of lipstick on his collar, Emily's shade, the one I'd commented on just last month when she wore it to our family dinner. "It was intense," he agreed, reaching for my hand across the table. "But I'm home now." The tenderness of the gesture nearly broke me. In that moment, I realized I was living with a perfect stranger, someone capable of looking me in the eye while constructing an alternate reality. The man I had married, the sister I had grown up with, neither existed as I had believed. I withdrew my hand gently. "You should get some rest." That night, as Michael slept beside me, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of my tears or rage. I would continue gathering evidence, building my case methodically and thoroughly. And when the time came to reveal what I knew, it wouldn't be in private where they could manage the narrative. It would be public, irrefutable, and completely on my terms. For the next several months, I lived a double life. During the day, I was Lisa Miller, devoted wife and loving sister. I attended family gatherings, maintained our home, and continued the routines of our marriage with robotic precision. At night, I became a detective in my own life, meticulously documenting the web of lies that surrounded me. The more I uncovered, the more elaborate their deception proved to be. They had created a shared digital calendar with coded entries to coordinate their meetings. They had a joint credit card I never knew about, used exclusively for their rendezvous. They had even discussed future plans, vacations they would take, a house they hoped to buy once they figured out the Lisa situation. Confrontation attempt. My first attempt at confrontation came after 3 months of surveillance. I approached it strategically, choosing a moment when Michael was vulnerable, tired after a long shift, slightly mellowed by a glass of wine. "I think we should talk about Emily," I said casually as we sat on the porch swing one evening. His body tensed infinitesimally. "What about her?" I've noticed you two seem close. Michael laughed, the sound slightly forced. She's your sister. Of course we're close. No, I mean really close, Michael. Is there something you want to tell me? For a moment, I thought he might confess. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps even guilt. Then his expression hardened. I don't know what you're suggesting, but I don't appreciate it, he said coolly. Emily is family. If you're feeling insecure about something, that's on you. The swift denial and redirection, casting me as the irrational jealous wife, was so smooth it almost made me doubt my own evidence. Almost. My next approach was more direct. I suggested marriage counseling, citing our growing distance as the reason. I don't think we need a stranger telling us how to fix our marriage, Michael said dismissively. We're just going through a phase. Empty nest and all that. I left browser windows open to hotel confirmations, placed my documented timeline where he might accidentally discover it. Each time, Michael found ways to explain away the evidence or simply ignored it completely. Meanwhile, Emily launched her own counter-offensive. She began calling me more frequently, suggesting sister activities with artificial enthusiasm. She introduced me to single men at gallery events, commenting, Michael and I both think you work too much. You should date more. The casual cruelty of trying to set me up while sleeping with my husband was breathtaking. The most painful revelation came from my mother, who innocently mentioned that Emily had been helping Michael plan something special for your anniversary. She's been so secretive about it, Mom said, but she mentioned they've been working on the surprise for months. Our anniversary was still 4 months away. The idea that they were using it as cover for their meetings, involving my own mother in their fiction, crystallized something inside me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic campaign to manipulate everyone around us. I decided to force the issue. One evening, I deliberately left evidence of their affair, hotel receipts, screenshots of their messages, on the kitchen counter where Michael would find them when he came home. I waited in the living room, prepared for the confrontation that would finally bring everything into the open. Hours passed. Finally, Michael entered, his expression grave. We need to talk, he said, sitting across from me. Yes, we do, I agreed, feeling a strange sense of relief that the charade was ending. I found something disturbing, he continued, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. I reached for it, expecting to see the evidence I had left for him. Instead, I found printed emails between me and a colleague from work, innocent messages discussing a project, edited to appear romantic and incriminating. I know about David, Michael said, his voice tight with manufactured pain. How long has this been going on? The moment was so surreal I almost laughed. He had fabricated evidence of an affair to accuse me, a perfect distraction from his own betrayal. There's nothing going on with David, I said calmly. Those messages are about work, and you know it. They seem pretty intimate to me, he countered. All those late nights at the office. It makes sense now. I realized with startling clarity that he wasn't just deflecting. He was setting up his justification, creating a narrative where my imagined infidelity had driven him into Emily's arms. The calculated nature of it chilled me to the bone. I think we should take some time apart, he said, reaching for my hand with practiced concern. This isn't healthy for either of us. In that moment, I understood direct confrontation would never work. Michael and Emily had invested too much in their version of reality. They would deny, deflect, and distort the truth until their fiction became the accepted narrative. Time apart might be good, I agreed, watching relief flood his features. He hadn't expected me to concede so easily. I'm glad you understand, he said, squeezing my hand. This isn't about blame. Sometimes people just grow apart. His practiced sympathy was almost admirable. I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed this conversation with Emily, perfecting his concerned expression in her bathroom mirror. I'll stay with Emily while we figure things out, he continued. She offered her guest room when I told her about the situation. Of course, she had. I nodded, playing my assigned role in their script while mentally shifting to a new phase of my investigation. If Michael thought my acquiescence meant surrender, he was gravely mistaken. The final preparation. The following week, as Michael moved some of his things to Emily's apartment, I took a personal day from work. While they believed I was at the office, I visited a private investigator recommended by a colleague. Douglas Parker specialized in infidelity cases and had testified in hundreds of divorce proceedings. "I'm not looking to hire you," I explained, spreading my evidence across his desk. "I need a professional assessment of what I've gathered and advice on what else I might need." Douglas reviewed my documentation with impressed surprise. "Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've brought a complete case file." "It's what I do for a living," I replied, "just not usually in my personal life." He confirmed what I already suspected. My evidence was compelling but could potentially be explained away in isolation. He recommended additional documentation: financial records showing patterns of deception, witness statements from hotel staff, and most importantly, evidence of their intent to mislead rather than just the affair itself. "Intent is powerful in divorce proceedings," he advised. "If you can prove they deliberately planned to deceive you and others, it strengthens your position considerably." I left his office with renewed purpose and a list of resources. Over the next month, I expanded my investigation beyond just documenting the affair. I uncovered financial deceptions I hadn't previously detected. Michael had been diverting money from our joint savings to a private account for nearly a year. Emily had charged expenses to my credit card on multiple occasions when I had loaned it to her for emergencies. The most stunning discovery came through Michael's cloud storage, which automatically backed up his text messages. I found conversations between him and Emily discussing me in cruel, dismissive terms, mocking my trust, planning how they would present their relationship to her family after the inevitable divorce. "She's so caught up in her work, she hasn't noticed a thing," Michael had written. "We could probably have sex on the kitchen counter while she's typing away in the next room. She'll probably thank us for making the decision for her," Emily replied. "She never really knew how to be a proper wife anyway. And let's be honest, at 55, who else is going to want her?" Reading their casual cruelty transformed something within me. The numbness that had protected me gave way to a cold, clarifying anger. This wasn't just betrayal. It was systematic emotional abuse, a coordinated effort to undermine my reality while preserving their self-image. I began preparing for the endgame. Divorce was inevitable, but it would happen on my terms, not theirs. I consulted with Diana Wright, the most respected divorce attorney in Seattle, who reviewed my evidence with clinical precision. "This is exceptional documentation," she said. "Most clients bring me tissues and accusations. You've brought receipts, literal and figurative. What should I expect?" I asked. "With what you've provided, a favorable settlement certainly. But Washington is a no-fault state. The courts won't punish them for the affair itself." "I'm not looking for legal punishment," I clarified. "I want the truth recognized. I want their narrative dismantled." Diana studied me thoughtfully. "The court of public opinion can be more punishing than any legal judgment. If that's your aim, you need to consider carefully how and when you present this evidence." Her words crystallized my approach. Michael and Emily had orchestrated a public fiction. The appropriate response was public truth, delivered in a way they couldn't control or rewrite. As I left Diana's office, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Family dinner at our house this Sunday. Your father's 80th birthday. Michael and Emily both confirmed. Please come. Don't make it awkward." The perfect stage had presented itself. All the players would be gathered, expecting to manage the narrative of my failing marriage and their blossoming love. They had no idea I was no longer following their script. The final showdown, I spent the next 3 days meticulously preparing my presentation. Each email was tailored to its recipient, containing only the information relevant to them. For my father, evidence of how Michael had borrowed money from him while simultaneously diverting funds to a secret account. For my mother, proof of how Emily had used her to establish alibis. For my aunts and cousins, documentation of the specific lies told to each of them. The final touch was a master email to myself that contained everything: the complete timeline, all evidence, and a detailed account of my discovery process. This would be my reference during the inevitable chaos that would follow my revelation. On Sunday morning, I woke with strange serenity. I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that Michael had always complimented. I styled my hair, applied light makeup, and adorned myself with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me, a talisman of her strength that I desperately needed. As I prepared to leave, my phone chimed with a text from Emily. Just checking you're coming tonight. Dad would be heartbroken if you didn't show. We're all family after all. The casual audacity nearly broke my composure. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that in a few hours, their fiction would collapse under the weight of irrefutable evidence. I arrived at my parents' home precisely on time, bearing a homemade cake and a carefully wrapped gift for my father. The familiar sounds of family gathering enveloped me as I stepped inside. Laughter from the living room, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the low murmur of sports commentary from the television. Michael and Emily were already there, seated side by side on the sofa. They had maintained a pretense of casual friendship in family settings, but now, with the truth of their relationship about to be unveiled, they sat slightly closer than before, testing the waters of their public couplehood. Lisa, my mother greeted me with a tight hug. I'm so glad you came. This means so much to your father. I returned her embrace, breathing in her familiar perfume, wondering how she would look at me after reading my email, if she would recognize the strength it had taken to endure these months of deception. The dinner proceeded with excruciating normalcy. We ate my mother's pot roast and discussed safe topics: the weather, my cousin's new baby, my father's retirement plans. I participated mechanically, watching Michael and Emily exchange glances across the table, clearly anticipating the moment they had planned. As dessert was served, Michael cleared his throat and tapped his glass. I felt a chill of déjà vu, recognizing the gesture from countless family gatherings when he'd made announcements: job promotions, our engagement, the purchase of our home, moments that had once filled me with pride, now revealed as steps in a relationship built on quicksand. What I hadn't anticipated was a last-minute complication. Just as Michael began to speak, my phone buzzed with an alert from my email scheduling system. Delivery failed, server error. A quick check confirmed my worst fear. The carefully timed emails had not been sent. While Michael launched into his prepared speech about difficult decisions and unexpected love, I frantically tried to resend the emails. The server response was clear: temporary outage, estimated recovery time unknown. I felt a moment of pure panic. My entire plan hinged on those emails arriving simultaneously with Michael's announcement. Without them, I would indeed be cast as the blindsided, pitiful middle-aged wife they expected me to be. Michael was reaching the climax of his speech, his hand now openly holding Emily's. My family watched with expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to pity, exactly the reaction they had anticipated. I had seconds to decide: walk out in apparent defeat, confront them without my evidence. Neither option was acceptable. As Michael uttered the words, "Emily and I have fallen in love," I realized there was a third option. I had brought my laptop as backup. All the evidence was there, organized and ready. With calm determination, I opened it under the table and navigated to my email program. As Michael finished speaking and all eyes turned expectantly toward me, I pressed send on a single email to everyone present, with all attachments included. "Please, everyone," I said into the stunned silence, "check your emails right now." The choreography of the next few moments was almost beautiful in its precision. Phones chimed in succession around the table as my email arrived. Confused glances were exchanged before one by one. Family members opened the message. "I've prepared some additional context for Michael's announcement," I explained calmly, watching Michael's confident smile falter. "Just some documentation I thought everyone should have." My father was the first to react, his face darkening as he scrolled through his phone. My cousin Robert whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath. My mother set her phone down with trembling hands, looking between Emily and me with dawning horror. "What is this?" Michael demanded, reaching for his own phone. "It's the truth," I replied simply. "Everything I've discovered over the past year, organized for clarity: hotel receipts, text messages, financial records, the complete history of your relationship with my sister." Emily lunged for her phone, her face draining of color as she opened the email. "These are private conversations. You had no right." "They're conversations about me," I corrected. "About how to deceive me, about how pathetic and oblivious I am." I particularly enjoyed the exchange where you discussed whether to tell me before or after our anniversary and decided that ruining her holiday would be cruel. Michael was frantically scrolling through the evidence, his planned narrative of star-crossed lovers disintegrating with each swipe. "This is invasion of privacy," he sputtered. "You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted. "Washington is a one-party consent state for recordings. Our shared accounts were well shared, and most of this information was gathered from devices and accounts you left open, often in our home." The room had fallen into stunned silence, broken only by the occasional gasp as someone reached a particularly damning piece of evidence. "You plan to announce this tonight," I continued, my voice steady. "You choreographed this moment to control the narrative. The reluctant lovers, the difficult decision, the clean break. You just didn't expect me to have a narrative of my own. Emily, how could you do this to your sister?" My mother found her voice first. It was happening, the shift in perception I had worked for months to achieve, the rewriting of their carefully constructed fiction. Michael attempted damage control, his doctor's authority surfacing as he tried to regain command of the situation. "This is clearly Lisa's way of processing a difficult transition," he said, adopting a clinical tone. "She's created this elaborate—" "Stop talking, Michael," my father interrupted, his voice ice cold. "My daughter doesn't fabricate evidence. It's her literal profession." Emily shifted to tears, her go-to strategy when confronted. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she sobbed. "It just happened. You can't control who you fall in love with." "According to your text," my cousin Robert interjected, holding up his phone, "you've been planning this for over 3 years." "That's not just happening." The chorus of condemnation grew as more family members processed what they were reading. Aunt Marie was comforting my mother, who couldn't stop staring at Emily as if seeing a stranger. Uncle Frank was asking Michael pointed questions about financial discrepancies mentioned in the emails. I remained silent, watching the natural consequences unfold. After months of documentation, analysis, and preparation, there was nothing more I needed to say. The evidence spoke for itself, clear and irrefutable. I gathered my purse and stood. "I should go," I said quietly. "Dad, I'm sorry about your birthday dinner." My father stood immediately. "I'll walk you out." Outside, he hugged me fiercely. "I had no idea what you've been going through," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "I needed to understand it first," I explained. "And I needed everyone else to understand it too, not just believe me." As I drove away, my phone lit up with messages from family members, expressions of support, shock, and solidarity. I turned it off, welcoming the silence. Epilogue. The next morning, I filed for divorce. Michael and Emily's attempts to control the narrative had collapsed completely, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the methodical presentation of truth. 3 months later, as I signed the final divorce papers, my lawyer asked if I felt satisfied with the outcome. "I don't feel satisfaction," I replied honestly. "Just clarity." I had built a career uncovering financial discrepancies and following evidence trails. I never imagined my greatest case would be documenting my own unraveling marriage. But professionals use the tools they have, and in the end, methodical documentation had accomplished what emotional confrontation never could. It had replaced deception with truth. That evening, I packed the last of my belongings and moved into my new apartment overlooking Puget Sound. As the sun set over the water, I deleted the investigation files from my computer, the final step in a process that had consumed nearly a year of my life. At 55, I was starting over, but not empty-handed. I had my self-respect, my family support, and the knowledge that I had faced betrayal with dignity and strength. Tomorrow would be the first page of a new chapter, one written entirely in my own hand. My name is Janet Martin, and I've been working as a senior programmer at Tech Solutions for 25 years. Unlike many of my younger colleagues who worry about job security in the ever-changing tech landscape, I've managed to stay relevant and valued. During my early career, I quickly established myself as someone reliable who could solve complex problems, which has served me well as the industry evolved around me. My life took an unexpected turn 12 years ago when my marriage fell apart. After the divorce, with no children to consider, I made the difficult decision to move back into my parents' home. My father, William, now 78, was showing early signs of dementia, and my mother, Martha, 76, was struggling with severe arthritis. They needed help, and I needed to rebuild my life. What I thought would be a temporary arrangement has stretched into over a decade of balancing my career with caregiving responsibilities. Janet, we were hoping you might continue staying with us, Mom said one evening as we sat around our dining table, her arthritic hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. Dad nodded beside her, his eyes momentarily focusing before that familiar fog seemed to settle over them again. What do you mean? I asked, setting down my fork. I've been here for years now. I'm not planning on going anywhere. The confusion in my voice was genuine. After all this time caring for them, did they think I was considering leaving? Dad cleared his throat, a habit that always preceded difficult conversations. Well, sweetheart, the truth is, we're having more trouble keeping up with all the bills these days. Your mother's medication costs keep rising, and my retirement funds aren't stretching as far as we'd hoped. If you stayed, Mom added quickly, her voice tinged with embarrassment, and maybe contributed a little more to the household, it would really help us out. The heating bills alone this winter. I looked at their worried faces, the deep wrinkles etched by decades of life's challenges. These were the people who raised me, who supported me through college, through my divorce, through everything. Despite the fact that I'd occasionally dreamed about having my own place again, about coming home to quiet and not having to immediately start preparing medications or dinner, I couldn't say no. How much would help? I asked, already mentally adjusting my budget. The relief on their faces was immediate and heartbreaking. Maybe $2,000 a month, Dad suggested tentatively, for bills, groceries, and the new medications the insurance won't cover. And just like that, I became the primary provider for my elderly parents at 52 years old, adding financial responsibility to my already full plate of caregiving. I kept the rest of my salary in my savings account, watching it grow modestly each month while trying not to think about how my retirement plans were gradually shifting further into the future. I didn't spend much on myself, just the basics and occasional small treats. At my age, I'd learned the difference between wants and needs, and frankly, I was too exhausted from juggling work and caregiving to shop or travel much anyway. My sister, Carol, had a completely different philosophy about money and life in general. She was 7 years older than me at 59, married to her college sweetheart, Brian, and had a 12-year-old son named Michael from a late in life pregnancy that had surprised everyone. They lived in a fancy rented apartment across town and maintained the lifestyle of people with twice their income, a fact that became increasingly problematic as they aged with minimal retirement savings. Oh my God, Janet, are you seriously wearing that blazer again? Carol said during one of her Sunday visits. She was sprawled on our parents' couch, scrolling through her phone while Brian and Dad watched football, and Mom played with Michael. I looked down at my navy blazer, a well-made piece I'd bought 5 years ago that still looked perfectly professional. What's wrong with it? She rolled her eyes dramatically, a gesture that looked increasingly out of place on her 59-year-old face despite the Botox that kept her forehead smooth. I saw you wearing it in your Facebook photo from last Christmas. Don't you ever buy new clothes? You know, Nordstrom has a fantastic sale on their spring collection. I don't need new clothes. These ones work fine, I replied, trying not to let her get under my skin. After decades of her comments, I should have been immune, but somehow they still had the power to make me feel inadequate. This is why you're still single after all these years, she sneered, as if my practical wardrobe was somehow responsible for my divorce and subsequent lack of romantic prospects. No wonder your husband left. No man wants a woman who looks like she's given up on herself. I bit my tongue instead of pointing out that while I had a growing savings account and a stable career, she and Brian were living paycheck to paycheck despite his formerly well-paying executive job. Carol worked part-time at a high-end boutique, mostly to get employee discounts on designer clothes as she put it, but their combined income disappeared as quickly as it came in. Luxury vacations, expensive restaurants, name brand clothes, and whatever else caught their fancy that week. Hey Janet, Carol said later that same day, cornering me in the kitchen while I was doing dishes. Her voice had shifted from mocking to sweet, a change I recognized all too well from our childhood. Can I borrow $500? There's this gorgeous handbag I've been eyeing, and I'm a little short this month. Brian's new position doesn't pay what he used to make, you know. I sighed, my hands deep in soapy water as I scrubbed a pot that Mom could no longer manage with her painful joints. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Sure, I said, not looking up from the dishes. What was the point of arguing? It was easier to just give her the money than listen to the inevitable guilt trip about family loyalty. You're the best. She gave me a quick hug from behind, careful not to actually touch the dishwater. This is why you're my favorite sister. I'm your only sister, I reminded her. But she was already texting someone, probably telling them she could afford the handbag after all. The money would never be repaid, just like all the other loans over the years. It was the price of keeping peace in the family. When I wasn't at my day job or taking care of my parents, I spent most evenings working on a side project, a home security system app specifically designed for caregivers of elderly people with cognitive issues. It would allow remote monitoring, gentle alerts for the seniors, and emergency notifications that I believe could revolutionize how people cared for aging parents. It integrated existing camera systems but added intelligent alerts that could recognize falls or unusual behavior patterns, along with user-friendly controls that the current market was missing. Janet, it's almost midnight. Why are you still on that computer? Mom complained, standing in my doorway in her robe, her white hair sticking up on one side where she'd been sleeping. You're running up our electricity bill, and you need your rest at your age. Sorry, Mom. Just finishing something up, I said, not looking away from my screen where complex code filled multiple windows. The irony of her comment about my age wasn't lost on me. All she does is play those silly computer games, I heard Dad tell Mom as they walked back to their bedroom. No wonder she can't find a boyfriend. What man wants a woman obsessed with video games at her age? I didn't bother correcting them. They wouldn't understand what I was working on anyway, and I didn't have the energy to explain. Sometimes it was easier to let people believe what they wanted to believe. After all, I'd been the responsible daughter for so long that no one, not even my parents, really saw me anymore. Just the role I played in their lives. Little did I know that my quiet life of saving money, caring for my parents, and secretly coding was about to be turned upside down in ways I couldn't imagine. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday evening when I returned from work to find our driveway full of cars and the front door propped open with a box. I walked into chaos. The living room was filled with stacked boxes, suitcases, and random furniture. My sister was directing our parents like they were moving company employees, despite Mom's obvious pain as she tried to lift a box with her arthritic hands. What's going on? I asked, standing frozen in the doorway as I set down my laptop bag. Are you moving in? My stomach knotted with dread at the thought. Brian appeared from the hallway, looking defeated in a way I'd never seen before. His once confident posture was slumped, the gray in his hair more prominent than I remembered, his designer clothes wrinkled and worn. Brian lost his job, Carol announced before he could speak, her voice sharp with accusation aimed not at her husband but seemingly at the world. Can you believe how unfairly they treated him? His own friend of 20 years betrayed him. What happened? I asked, looking directly at Brian. He couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at his Italian leather shoes that suddenly seemed out of place among the moving boxes. It's complicated. Creative accounting, they called it, Carol explained defensively, using air quotes. He was just borrowing from one account to cover another. He was going to balance everything eventually. The CFO, who was supposed to be his friend, found out during an audit and went ballistic. You mean he was taking company money? I asked carefully, the programmer in me automatically translating euphemisms into concrete terms. The room went silent. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dad's confusion was clear. He was having one of his worst days cognitively, but Mom's face showed she understood exactly what was happening. That's a horrible thing to say. Carol snapped, her carefully maintained face flushing red beneath her makeup. His friend asked for the money back and for Brian to resign, which seems fair considering. I didn't have a choice. Brian finally spoke, his voice hollow. They had evidence. It was either resign or face charges. Real friends don't do that to each other, Carol interrupted, her voice rising. They understand when you're in a tight spot, when you need to maintain appearances. I dropped the subject, seeing that logic wasn't welcome in this conversation. Instead, I watched in stunned silence as my sister commandeered my parents' house like she owned it, ordering everyone around while contributing nothing. I helped Mom sit down in her favorite chair, noting how the stress was making her hands shake more than usual. At dinner, Mom announced that Carol, Brian, and Michael would be staying just until they get back on their feet. I nodded and silently prepared myself for what I knew was coming, a nightmare of epic proportions that would further complicate my already challenging caregiving responsibilities. The nightmare I predicted began almost immediately. My quiet, orderly life crumbled under the chaos of having Carol's family in the house. Brian found a new job within 2 weeks, but as he complained loudly to anyone who would listen, it paid half of what he made before. At 61, he claimed it was nearly impossible to find work at his former level after the misunderstanding with his previous employer. Carol kept her part-time job at the boutique, working just enough hours to claim she was contributing without actually helping much with their finances or, more importantly, with our parents' care. "This chicken is so dry," Carol complained at dinner one night, pushing her plate away dramatically. "Mom, don't you know how to use seasoning? We used to eat at Bellissimo's every Thursday, and their food was amazing. Maybe we should order takeout instead." Instead of defending her cooking or telling Carol to make her own dinner, Mom just nodded apologetically. "I'm sorry, dear. My hands aren't what they used to be. I'll try to do better next time." The defeated look on my mother's face, the woman who had once prepared holiday meals for 20 without breaking a sweat, made something twist painfully in my chest. I stabbed at my chicken, which was perfectly fine if a bit simple, and kept my mouth shut. The dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Somehow, Carol had become the center of everyone's attention and concern. Her problems were everyone's problems. Her complaints were valid grievances that needed immediate addressing, and I was just there. The ATM machine in the corner who paid the bills, cooked most meals, managed medications, and drove to doctor's appointments. One evening, I was working late on my security app when Carol barged into my room without knocking. I quickly minimized my code window, not wanting to explain yet again that I wasn't playing games. "I need to borrow $800, she announced, not even bothering with her usual fake sweetness. She stood there in her designer loungewear, freshly highlighted hair perfectly styled even at home. "Michael needs a new iPad for school, and we want to take him to that indoor water park this weekend. He's been so upset since we moved here. Didn't Brian just get paid?" I asked, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. It had been a long day at work, followed by taking Dad to a memory specialist appointment where we'd received less than encouraging news. "We have other expenses," she snapped, as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of her financial situation. "Are you going to help or not?" I relented that time, but when she asked again the following week for money to buy Brian a decent suit for work, I finally pushed back. "Maybe you should consider working full-time," I suggested at dinner after she asked me for money in front of everyone, clearly thinking I wouldn't say no with an audience. "The boutique is hiring a manager. I saw the sign in their window when I drove by yesterday." Carol's face turned crimson. "I can't believe how cruel you are. You know I need to be available for Michael after school. He's at a critical age. Mom and Dad are always here," I pointed out, immediately regretting bringing them into this as I saw Mom's nervous expression. "They could watch him for a couple of hours." "That's not the point," she shouted, throwing her napkin down and storming out of the room. Brian followed after, giving me a dirty look, while Michael stared at his plate in uncomfortable silence. Mom shook her head at me. "Janet, how could you be so heartless? Your sister is going through a difficult time. You know how hard it is to find work at our age." "We're all going through a difficult time," I muttered, looking pointedly at Dad, who was struggling to remember how to use his fork again, but no one was listening. They never did. Carol didn't speak to me for a week after that, which was actually a relief. I used the quiet time to finish my security app. After months of late nights and weekends hunched over my keyboard, sacrificing what little personal time I had, it was finally ready to show to someone. The morning I planned to demonstrate it to my boss, I felt a familiar twinge in my lower back, the result of years spent at a computer combined with helping lift my increasingly unsteady father. I swallowed an anti-inflammatory with my coffee and headed to work anyway. "This is incredible," Janet, my boss, Richard, said as I demonstrated the app's features in his office. His eyes widened as I showed him how it could detect specific movements, distinguish between normal behavior and potential emergencies, and send customized alerts. The user interface is so intuitive, especially for older adults and these algorithms. Did you develop all this yourself? I nodded, trying not to look too proud. It's been my side project for a while. I designed it originally with my father in mind, but I think it could help a lot of families in similar situations. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with new respect. At 58, he was one of the few people at the company close to my age, and I'd always appreciated how he valued experience over youth. Janet, this could completely disrupt the elder care security market. Our company could dominate if we owned this. My heart raced. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, recognition of my work and potentially a way to secure my future. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 for full ownership plus a percentage of future sales, he said. What do you think? I tried to keep my expression neutral despite the adrenaline rushing through me. $500,000 plus royalties? It was more than I dreamed of, enough to secure my retirement and maybe even afford proper care for my parents. That sounds fair. I managed to say as if I negotiated six-figure deals every day. We shook hands, and I walked out of his office in a daze. I had just become wealthy overnight, but as I drove home, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell my family. If they knew, the money would disappear into Carol's shopping sprees, Brian's investments, or my parents' enabling of their lifestyle. This was my chance for freedom, for a life of my own after years of putting others first, and I wasn't going to waste it. That evening, I contacted a realtor friend, Elizabeth, who had helped one of my colleagues find a condo. I need a place of my own, I told her over the phone, speaking quietly from my car in the driveway. I want to buy a condo close to work, move-in ready. Something that would still allow me to visit my parents regularly, but give me my own space. Can you help? Absolutely. Elizabeth's enthusiastic voice came through the speaker. I have a few places in mind already that would be perfect for someone in your situation. Let's meet tomorrow after you finish work. When I entered the house, I found everyone gathered in the living room, an unusual sight for a weeknight. The TV was off, and even Michael wasn't on his ever-present iPad. They stopped talking as soon as I walked in, their expressions a mix of determination and awkwardness that immediately put me on edge. Janet, we need to talk to you, Mom said, patting the space beside her on the sofa. Her wedding ring slid loosely on her finger. She'd lost more weight recently, something I'd been meaning to discuss with her doctor. I sat down cautiously, setting my laptop bag on the floor. What's up? Dad cleared his throat, that familiar harbinger of difficult conversations. We've been looking at our expenses, and well, things are getting tight. With 5 adults and a child in the house, the utility bills have gone way up, and groceries. You wouldn't believe how much food a growing boy needs. He glanced fondly at Michael, who barely looked up from picking at a loose thread on the couch. What your father is trying to say, Mom continued, her arthritic fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt, is that we were hoping you might be able to contribute a bit more to the household expenses. The $2,000 you've been giving us just isn't covering everything anymore, especially with your father's new medication. I looked around the room. My parents looked embarrassed but hopeful. Carol was examining her manicure, her recently purchased designer watch glinting on her wrist, pretending this wasn't her idea, though I knew it was. Brian, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable. Are Carol and Brian contributing anything? I asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. My parents exchanged glances. Well, they're in a difficult position right now, Mom said softly, and you're single with no dependents. You can afford to help a little more. You've always been so responsible, Janet. There it was, the familiar refrain that had defined my life. Responsible Janet. Reliable Janet. Janet who never complains, never pushes back, never puts herself first. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head as I'd learned to do during my divorce when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. How much more were you thinking? Maybe $4,000 a month, Dad suggested, the amount causing my stomach to clench. That was more than double what I was already contributing, a significant portion of my take-home pay even with my senior position. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, I just nodded, my face a mask of calm that I'd perfected over years of dealing with my family's expectations. Fine. Starting this month. Carol finally looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. She thought she'd won. Little did she know that her victory would be short-lived. 3 days later, I met Elizabeth at a beautiful apartment complex 10 minutes from my office. The two-bedroom unit she showed me was perfect, modern, bright, and on the top floor with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard with mature oak trees. The second bedroom could be my home office, and there was enough space in the living area to have my parents over for dinner sometimes. This is exactly what I've been looking for, I told Elizabeth as we stood in the kitchen with its modest but updated appliances. It just came on the market yesterday, she explained. At this price point, it won't last long. I used part of the money I'd received from selling my application to buy it outright, signing the papers that day. The sense of ownership, of finally having something that was truly mine after years of putting others first, was overwhelming. As I held the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: possibility. While I was secretly furnishing my new condo, I noticed something strange happening at my parents' house. Mom, Dad, and Carol kept exchanging these weird looks during dinner, like they were all in on some secret plan. Brian mostly kept his head down, focusing on his food and occasionally helping Michael cut his meat. Something was definitely up, but I couldn't figure out what. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a pile of my belongings stacked in the hallway. My books, clothes, laptop charger, and even the framed photo of me receiving my 20-year service award at work were all dumped unceremoniously in a heap. What the hell? I muttered, dropping my bag and heading straight to my bedroom. Except it wasn't my bedroom anymore. Michael was sitting on my bed, now covered with superhero sheets, playing a video game. The walls that had once held my programming certificates and the few personal photos I displayed now featured posters of cartoon characters and sports teams. My desk, where I'd created my app, was gone, replaced by a child-sized table covered in action figures. Aunt Janet, Michael said, looking up from his game. Look at my new room. Isn't it cool? Mom says I can have friends over now. Before I could answer, Carol appeared in the doorway behind me. Oh, you're home, she said, not sounding surprised at all. What's going on? I asked, my voice deadly calm despite the rage and hurt building inside me. This wasn't just any room. It was the bedroom I'd grown up in, the space that had been my sanctuary through my parents' aging, my divorce, all the challenges of the past decade. We moved Michael into your room, she said with a shrug, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He needs more space for his toys and schoolwork. The guest room was just too small for a boy his age. And where exactly am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Mom appeared behind Carol, wringing her hands nervously. Janet, dear, we thought since you're hardly ever home anyway, always at work or on that computer, you wouldn't mind using the sofa in the living room. Just until Carol and Brian get back on their feet. I looked from Mom to Carol, who wasn't even trying to hide her smug satisfaction. So you moved all my things without asking me? We knew you'd make a fuss if we asked, Carol said with a dismissive wave of her hand. And Michael really needed the space. His old room was barely bigger than a closet. Speaking of his old room, why can't I use that? I asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear them say it. Carol and Mom exchanged another of those looks. Well, Mom said hesitantly, we thought Carol could use it as a dressing room. You know how many clothes she has, and there's just no space in her and Brian's room for all of them. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. They had kicked me out of my bedroom, the room I'd had since childhood, the room I was essentially paying for with my $4,000 monthly contribution, to make a dressing room for my sister, the sister who wasn't contributing a dime to the household. I looked at her designer outfit, then at my pile of belongings in the hall, and something inside me snapped. But instead of screaming or crying like they probably expected, I just shrugged. You know what? That's fine, I said calmly, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. I won't be sleeping on the sofa because I'll be sleeping in my own condo. Carol laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Right, your imaginary condo. Give it up, Janet, We all know you don't have your own place. I do, actually, I replied, feeling a surprising sense of power in saying the words aloud for the first time. I bought it last week. I was going to tell you all this weekend, but it seems you've made the decision easier for me. Mom and Carol stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You bought a condo? Mom asked, her voice small. How? With what money? That doesn't matter, I said, turning to head downstairs. What matters is that I'm moving out today. I went down to the living room and called a moving company, booking their first available slot, which happened to be early tomorrow morning. Then I called my boss to request a day off, explaining I had a family emergency. Throughout all of this, my family hovered nearby, their expressions ranging from disbelief to growing concern. Janet, you can't be serious, Dad said, finally joining the conversation after coming in from the garage. For a moment, he seemed more lucid than he had in weeks. I'm completely serious, I replied, ending my call with the movers. They'll be here at 7 a.m. tomorrow to get my things. But we need to talk about this, Mom pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. If you're upset about the room, we can figure something out. Maybe Michael can share with Brian and Carol for a while, or, it's not about the room, I interrupted, surprised at how calm I felt. It's about respect and boundaries and the fact that I pay $4,000 a month to live here, and you still treat me like I'm less important than everyone else in this house. It's about years of being taken for granted, of being seen as nothing more than a checkbook and a caregiver. Carol, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Wait, you actually bought a condo? With what money? You're just a programmer. I didn't answer her directly. I'm going to pack what's left of my things now, I said, walking past them toward the pile in the hallway. Don't touch anything else that belongs to me. The next morning, the movers arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. I directed them to the pile of belongings in the hallway, which had grown as I had gathered the rest of my stuff from around the house the night before. My family watched in stunned silence as the men carried box after box out to the truck. Where exactly is this condo? Dad finally asked as I was doing a final check to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen him. Near my office, I said, my voice softer as I addressed him. Despite everything, I couldn't be harsh with my father, who was as much a victim of Carol's manipulation as I was. How much did it cost? Carol demanded, her arms crossed over her chest. And how did you afford it? You've been giving most of your money to Mom and Dad for years. I turned to face my family, who were all standing in the living room, watching me like I was performing some strange ritual they didn't understand. That's not really any of your business. We're your family, Mom said, sounding hurt and confused. Of course it's our business. Family works both ways, Mom, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. And for a long time, it's only gone one way in this house. What does that mean? Carol asked defensively. It means I'm done being everyone's ATM, I said. I'm done giving money that's never appreciated, never enough, and never used responsibly. I'm done being the only one expected to sacrifice. So you're abandoning us? Mom asked, tears welling in her eyes. What about the bills? The groceries? Your father's medications. What about them? I asked. Carol and Brian are adults with jobs. Let them contribute for a change. We can barely afford our own expenses, Carol protested, her voice rising. We have a child. Then maybe you should reconsider your spending habits, I suggested. Maybe you don't need designer clothes and expensive gadgets while asking me to pay for groceries. Carol's face hardened. You know what? I think you should give us your condo. We need it more than you do. We have a family. What do you have? Nothing. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The absolute audacity was almost impressive. No, Carol. I'm not giving you my condo. I'm not giving you anything anymore. Ma'am, we've loaded everything. One of the movers appeared in the doorway. Are you ready to go? I nodded, picking up my purse. I'm ready. Janet, please. Mom tried one last time, reaching for my hand with her gnarled fingers. Don't leave like this. What about your father's care? You know I can't lift him anymore. The guilt stabbed at me, sharp and familiar. I'll call you in a few days. I said, not making any promises beyond that. We'll figure out a care plan. I'll help arrange services. I looked directly at Carol. But I won't be your live-in nurse or your bank anymore. I followed the moving truck to my new condo, a sense of liberation growing with every mile that separated me from my family's house. For the first time in years, possibly decades, I was putting myself first, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The next few days were a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, deliveries, and setting up utilities. I kept my phone off most of the time, knowing it would be flooded with messages from my family. When I finally turned it on, I was right. Dozens of missed calls and text messages, ranging from angry to pleading to guilt-tripping. Mom, Janet, please call us. Your father keeps asking where you are. Carol, I can't believe you would be so selfish. After everything we've done for you. Mom, the pharmacy called. Dad's medication is ready, but I can't drive to pick it up. My arthritis is so bad today. Carol, you need to come back and fix this mess you've created. Michael is crying. Brian, your parents need you. Think about someone besides yourself for once. I read each message, feeling a mixture of guilt, anger, and determination. The last one from Brian nearly made me throw my phone across the room. Think about someone besides yourself? That's all I had done for years. After a week of silence and finally settling into my new place, I decided to visit my parents' house. I wanted to have a calm, reasonable conversation about boundaries and expectations. I'd researched some home healthcare options that could help with Dad's care while still allowing me to be involved but not consumed by it. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday morning, I could see the curtains twitch. They'd been watching for me. I barely made it to the door before it swung open. Mom pulled me into a tight hug, her thin frame feeling even more fragile than I remembered. Thank goodness you came back, she said, relief washing over her face. We've been so worried. Your father's been so confused without your help with his medications. Dad appeared behind her, looking simultaneously happy and disoriented. Janet? Is that you? Where have you been, sweetheart? The genuine confusion in his eyes made my heart ache. I'm not moving back, I said immediately, before they could get the wrong idea. I just came to talk. I handed Mom a paper bag. I picked up Dad's prescription on the way. We understand, Mom said, pulling me inside. We've been doing a lot of thinking too. I doubted that, but I sat down anyway. The house was noticeably messier than when I lived there. A stack of unwashed dishes sat in the sink, and Dad's pill organizer was empty, explaining his increased confusion. Carol and Brian were already seated in the living room, with Michael playing a video game with the sound too loud. Carol quickly motioned for him to turn it down when she saw me. Lucy, Dad began, using my sister's name instead of mine, something that happened more frequently as his dementia progressed. It's Janet, William, Mom corrected gently. Janet, we know we made a mistake, Dad said, focusing with visible effort. Your room is yours again whenever you want it. Michael moved back to his old room, didn't he, Carol? And I didn't make a dressing room, Carol added quickly. I can fit my clothes in our bedroom. I looked at their eager faces. I appreciate that, but I'm happy in my new place. But we miss you, Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. And we need you here. It was the real reason for their sudden change of heart. You need my help and my money, I corrected her gently. No one denied it. The silence that followed was damning. We could work something out, Carol suggested, leaning forward with that persuasive tone she'd perfected since childhood. You could keep your condo, but maybe still help us with expenses. Or we could move into your condo. It must be bigger than our old apartment, and you could have this house again. I almost laughed at her audacity. After everything, she was still trying to get something from me. No, Carol. I'm not giving you my condo or my money. But that's not fair, she exclaimed, her carefully maintained composure cracking. You're so selfish. How did you even afford a condo anyway? You must have been hiding money from us for years. I sold an app I developed, I said simply. The security program I was working on at night. The one you all thought was me playing video games or wasting time. My boss bought it for $500,000 plus royalties. The silence that followed was deafening. $500,000? Brian finally whispered, his eyes wide. Mom looked faint. Why didn't you tell us? Carol demanded, her expression a mixture of shock and calculation that I recognized all too well. Because I knew what would happen, I replied honestly. You would have found reasons why you deserved that money more than me. Just like you're doing now. No one could argue with that. Carol's mouth opened and closed, but for once, she had no ready response. So you're just abandoning us? Mom asked, tears welling up. After everything we've done for you? The guilt trip might have worked before, but now it just made me sad. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said firmly. I've researched some home healthcare services that can help with Dad. I'll pay for 20 hours a week to start, and I'll still visit regularly and help coordinate his care. I handed Mom a folder with the information I'd prepared. They can start next week if we call Monday. They're specialized in dementia care, and they'll help with medications, bathing, and taking him to appointments. Mom took the folder uncertainly. But it won't be the same as having you here. No, it won't, I agreed. But it will be better in many ways. Dad will get professional care, and I'll still be involved but not exhausted. I turned to Carol and Brian. As for the household expenses, I think it's time you contributed your fair share. I've written up a breakdown of the monthly bills. I handed them another piece of paper. If we divide it 3 ways between me, you two, and Mom and Dad's Social Security, it comes to about $1,200 each. I'll continue to pay my portion, but I won't be covering yours anymore. We can't afford that, Carol protested. Then perhaps it's time to look for full-time work, I suggested. Or move to a smaller apartment. Or cancel some subscriptions and stop buying designer clothes. You expect me to work full-time at my age? Carol asked incredulously. I do, I replied simply. I'm older than you, and I've been working full-time for decades while also caring for Mom and Dad. Your age hasn't stopped you from shopping or traveling or going to restaurants. It shouldn't stop you from working either. As I walked out the door, I heard them calling me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. But for the first time, those words didn't hurt. They were just the desperate attempts of people who were losing their grip on something they had taken for granted for far too long. 6 months have passed since then. My relationship with my family has changed dramatically, but not in the way I initially feared. After the initial shock and anger wore off, we reached a new equilibrium. The home healthcare service has been wonderful for Dad. The professional caregivers know how to handle his confusion better than I ever did, and he's actually improved with their consistent care. Mom has adjusted to the new arrangement and even seems to enjoy having the healthcare workers around for company. Carol eventually found a full-time position managing the boutique where she worked part-time. She doesn't love the longer hours, but the increased salary has helped her and Brian stabilize their finances. Brian found a better job too, once he accepted that he needed to adjust his expectations. They've moved to a more affordable apartment and seem to be slowly learning to live within their means. Meanwhile, I'm thriving. My condo feels like the home I never had, peaceful, organized, and most importantly, mine. My career is advancing rapidly now that I have the energy to focus on it, and the royalties from my app are steadily accumulating. I've started taking weekend trips to places I've always wanted to visit, bought some new clothes, though still nothing Carol would approve of, and even began dating a kind engineer I met at a tech conference. I visit my parents twice a week and call daily to check in with them and their caregivers. It's a better relationship now, one based on choice rather than obligation. Mom has even started to see me as an individual again, asking about my work and my life instead of just what I can do for her. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I was too harsh, too sudden in my break for independence. But then I remember how they treated me, not as a family member to be respected, but as a resource to be used. And I know that walking away wasn't selfish. It was self-preservation. As I sit on my balcony watching the sunset, my phone rings. It's Mom, calling not to ask for money or help, but just to chat about her day. I smile as I answer. This is what family should be. People who care about each other as people, not just for what they can provide. Hi, Mom, I say. How are you feeling today? And for the first time in years, I genuinely want to hear the answer. Epilogue. The following spring, I hosted a small dinner party at my condo. Mom and Dad came, with their caregiver Sarah helping Dad navigate the new environment. Carol and Brian were there too, along with Michael, who had grown 2 inches since I'd moved out. My new friend Robert, the engineer I'd been seeing, rounded out the group. "This is lovely, Janet," Mom said, looking around my space with genuine appreciation. "You've made it so beautiful." There was no resentment in her voice, just a hint of pride. Dad was having one of his good days. "Always knew you were smart," he said, patting my hand. "Building computer things." It wasn't exactly accurate, but the sentiment warmed my heart. Carol looked different somehow. Less tense, her clothes still stylish but not ostentatiously expensive. "The store's doing well," she told me as we served dessert. "They're talking about promoting me to regional manager." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. "I'm sorry," she added quietly when the others were distracted. For everything before. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of all that had happened, but from Carol it was significant. "I know," I replied. "Me too." As I looked around at my family gathered in my home, on my terms, in a relationship I had helped reshape, I realized something important. It's never too late to change the patterns of a lifetime. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to start putting yourself first. At 52, I had finally learned what had eluded me for decades. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Not just for my sake, but for everyone's. In establishing my independence, I had actually helped my parents get better care, pushed Carol towards self-sufficiency, and created space for genuine affection to grow again. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still difficult days. Dad's condition would only worsen with time. Mom's arthritis wasn't getting better. Carol would always be Carol. But now we face these challenges from a place of honesty and mutual respect rather than resentment and obligation. As everyone prepared to leave that evening, Dad suddenly took my hand. In a moment of lucidity that had become increasingly rare, he looked directly into my eyes. "Proud of you," he said clearly. "Standing up for yourself. About time." And in that moment, I knew that walking away hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of something better, for all of us. My name is April Harris, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought my life was pretty good. At 42, I had built a solid career at Marshall Financial Group, a Fortune 500 company with branches in almost every state. I'd been recognized for my analytical skills multiple times, earning awards that lined my office shelf. I lived in a spacious apartment in Boston with my boyfriend of 3 years, Thomas Walker. We met when I was already established in my career, and things moved quickly between us. I had worked hard for everything I had: my dream position as a senior financial analyst, the apartment with the view of the city I'd always wanted. I remember the night everything fell apart like it happened yesterday instead of 2 weeks ago. The memory is seared into my mind, sharp and painful. It was Maria's birthday party. She's one of my closest colleagues and friends in Boston. The celebration was at this upscale bar downtown with a private room in the back, all ambient lighting and expensive cocktails. The party was in full swing when I decided to use the restroom. As I walked down the hallway, my heel catching slightly on the plush carpet, I noticed a couple making out in a dimly lit corner near the coat check. I didn't mean to stare, but something about the man's profile looked familiar. The curve of his jaw, the way he tilted his head. When he shifted slightly, my stomach dropped like an elevator with snapped cables. It was Thomas, my Thomas, with his hands all over some blonde I'd never seen before. The sight hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen, watching as they kissed. It took a few seconds for my brain to process what my eyes were seeing. Then, the anger hit me like a tsunami, washing away any hesitation. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted, loud enough that several people turned to look. My voice echoed off the walls, shattering the murmured conversations around us. Thomas jumped back like he'd been electrocuted. His eyes widened when he saw me, guilt flashing across his face before he tried to compose himself. "April, don't you dare say, this isn't what it looks like." I spat, my voice shaking with 8 years of believing in us. "Because it looks exactly like my boyfriend cheating on me at my friend's birthday party." "April, Please, he pleaded, reaching toward me. Let's go home and talk about this. The blonde had already slipped away, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost. Home? I laughed, but it sounded hollow, even to my ears. You mean my apartment that I pay for? The one you live in practically rent-free because I'm an idiot who believed you loved me? I want your stuff out of my apartment by tomorrow. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but also strangely liberating. I turned and walked out of the bar, ignoring Thomas calling my name. Maria followed me outside and helped me get a cab. Her arm around my shoulders felt like the only solid thing in a world suddenly turned upside down. I'm so sorry, April, she whispered, her voice thick with genuine concern. What a complete jerk. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head, fighting back tears. No, I need to be alone right now. But thank you. I was too angry to cry during the cab ride. That would come later when I was alone in my apartment, surrounded by Thomas's things that reminded me of what a fool I'd been. Instead, I sat rigid, staring out the window at the Boston streets, feeling something inside me harden into resolve. The painful memories, for the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects. Anything to avoid going back to my apartment. But every time I did return home, the emptiness hit me, not because I missed Thomas. The anger was still too fresh for that, but because I realized I had no real ties to Boston other than my job. My real home was back in Pinewood, a small town in upstate New York. The two-story colonial house on Maple Street that my father, Joseph Harris, had built with his own hands. The home he'd left to me when he died from cancer 8 years ago. I was 34 and well into my career when it happened. Mom had called me at 3 a.m. to tell me Dad had taken a turn for the worse, but by the time I made the 6-hour drive home, he was already gone. That night replays in my mind sometimes. The desperate drive through darkness, praying I'd make it in time, and the crushing realization when I saw Mom's face at the door that I was too late. Dad and I had always been close. He taught me to fish at the small lake just outside town, showed me how to change a tire, and always told me I could be anything I wanted to be. This house will always be yours, Apricot, he'd said during one of my last visits, using the nickname only he ever called me by. No matter where life takes you, you'll always have a place to come home to. He'd been sitting in his favorite chair by the fireplace, already weakened by the cancer, but still with that determined glint in his eye. Dad had left the house to me in his will. It was his way of making sure I'd always have a place to call home. After the funeral, I went back to my life and tried to focus on building my career. Mom lived in the house alone for about a year, and then she dropped a bombshell on me. She was getting remarried to a guy named Robert Smith, who had 2 teenage kids from a previous marriage. I wasn't happy about it. It felt too soon after Dad, and the idea of strangers living in our family home made my stomach knot with anxiety. But Mom pleaded with me, saying she was lonely and that Robert was a good man who made her happy. I remembered how her voice had trembled slightly on the phone. Please understand, April, she'd said. After your father died, the house felt so empty. Robert helps fill that emptiness. In the end, I agreed to let them move in. What else could I do? I loved my mom, and the house was too big for her to live in alone. I told myself that Dad would have wanted her to be happy. After they moved in, I took the job in Boston instead of moving back home. Part of it was the career opportunity, but if I'm being honest, a bigger part was that I didn't feel like it was my home anymore. The few times I visited during holidays, I felt like an outsider. Mom was always busy with Robert or his kids, Emma and Jason. They were polite enough, but it was clear I wasn't part of their new family unit. Each visit left me feeling more disconnected from the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. As I sat in my half-empty Boston apartment, scrolling through my phone and ignoring Thomas's desperate texts, something inside me shifted. Looking around at the space that now felt as hollow as my relationship had been, I made a decision. It was time to go home, to my home. My company had a branch in Albany, just a 30-minute drive from Pinewood. I could transfer there, reclaim my house, and start fresh. The thought sent a surge of determination through me that I hadn't felt in years. The decision, I called my boss, Michael Phillips, the next morning and asked for a meeting. He was a tall man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses he never seemed to need. I'd always respected his direct approach and fair management style. Over the years, he'd become something of a mentor to me. April, what's on your mind? He asked as I sat down across from his desk, his keen eyes studying my face. You've seemed distracted these past couple weeks. I need to request a transfer to the Albany branch, I said, getting straight to the point. My hands were steady in my lap, but my heart was racing. He steadied me for a moment, then sighed, removing his glasses. Is this about what happened with Thomas? Maria mentioned there was some trouble. Partly, I admitted. But it's more than that. I own a house in Pinewood, about 30 minutes from Albany. My father left it to me when he passed away. It's time I went back. Michael nodded slowly. You're one of our best analysts, April. I'd hate to lose you from the Boston office. We were considering you for the team lead position here. I appreciate that, I said, feeling a pang of regret at what I might be giving up. But this is something I need to do. Entirely? Let me make some calls and see what we can work out. The Albany branch could certainly use someone with your experience. 3 days later, Michael confirmed my transfer. I'd be taking a small pay cut, but I could live with that. The cost of living in Pinewood was a fraction of Boston's anyway. That night, I called Mom to tell her the news. My stomach tightened as I dialed, unsure of how she would take it. Mom, I've got something to tell you, I said when she answered, her voice bringing back memories of childhood dinners and bedtime stories. What is it, honey? She sounded distracted, the TV playing in the background. I'm moving back home, to the house, I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the weight of the decision. There was a pause. Oh. When? The caution in her voice was unmistakable. In about 2 weeks. I just wanted to let you know so you could get my room ready. I tried to sound casual, as if I were just coming for a weekend visit rather than reclaiming my property. Another pause, longer this time. Your room? But Emma's been using that room since she started college. She comes home on weekends and holidays. Well, she'll have to move to one of the other bedrooms, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the irritation rising in my chest. It's my house, Mom. Of course, she said quickly, her voice taking on that placating tone she often used when speaking to Robert. It's just unexpected, but we'll be happy to have you home. Something in her voice told me the opposite, but I pushed the thought away. Great. I'll see you soon then. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that my homecoming wasn't going to be as simple as I'd hoped, but I was determined to reclaim my life and my house, no matter what. The return home, the 2 weeks before my move went by in a blur. I terminated my lease, sold most of the furniture that Thomas and I had picked out together, and packed up everything that mattered. My books, my awards, the fishing rod Dad had given me on my 30th birthday. My colleagues threw me a goodbye party at our favorite bar, deliberately not the one where I caught Thomas cheating. Maria hugged me tightly, making me promise to stay in touch. You're doing the right thing, she whispered. Sometimes you need to go back to move forward. The drive to Pinewood took nearly 6 hours. My car was packed to the brim with boxes and suitcases, leaving just enough space for me to see out the rearview mirror. As I crossed the town line, familiar landmarks brought a bittersweet ache to my chest. The diner where Dad and I used to get pancakes on Sunday mornings, the library where I'd spent countless teenage weekends, the park where he taught me to throw a baseball. Finally, I pulled up to the 2-story colonial house on Maple Street, my house. Dad had designed it himself, working with a local builder to create our family home. The blue paint was a shade darker than I remembered, and the flower beds Mom had always meticulously maintained looked a bit overgrown. The maple tree in the front yard had grown significantly, casting a longer shadow than I recalled. My stomach tightened as I parked in the driveway. This wasn't just a visit. I was moving back, reclaiming what was mine. Before I could even grab my bags, the front door opened and Mom stepped out. She looked older than when I'd last seen her at Christmas, new lines around her eyes and her brown hair now streaked with more gray. She'd lost weight too, making her appear smaller, more fragile. April, she said, walking toward me with open arms, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Welcome home. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume, feeling the conflicting emotions of love and resentment swirl inside me. Hi, Mom. Robert appeared in the doorway, watching us. He was a tall man with thinning hair and a permanent frown. He wore pressed khakis and a button-down shirt as if my arrival was a business meeting he'd been forced to attend. I'd never disliked him exactly, but I'd never warmed to him either. There had always been something possessive in the way he moved through my father's house. April, he nodded as I approached the house. His eyes swept over my car, packed to the brim with boxes and suitcases. Looks like you brought your whole life with you. Just the essentials, I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. Most of it's clothes and work stuff. He grunted, not offering to help with my bags. Well, Emma moved her things to the guest room. Your old room's ready. Mom gave him a look I couldn't quite interpret, then turned to me. Come inside, honey. You must be exhausted from the drive. We can bring your things in later. The inside of the house felt both familiar and strange. The layout was the same, but the furniture had been rearranged, and many of the decorations I remembered from my childhood were gone, replaced by items I didn't recognize. Dad's favorite armchair was nowhere to be seen. In its place sat a modern leather recliner that screamed Robert's taste. The wall that once held family photos now displayed abstract art pieces that meant nothing to me. Looking around, I felt a stab of grief for what had been lost. This place that had once been filled with Dad's laughter and his woodworking projects now felt like a showcase home, stripped of personality and warmth. We redecorated a few years ago, Mom said, noticing my expression. Robert thought it was time for a fresh start. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without saying something I might regret. The first confrontation. As we walked through the dining room, Emma and Jason appeared from upstairs. Jason, now 19 and nearly 6 feet tall, gave me an awkward nod. He had grown considerably since I'd last seen him, his lanky frame filling out, though his expression remained guarded behind shaggy hair that fell over his eyes. Hey, he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. Hey, Jason. You got tall. I tried to smile to bridge the gap of years and estrangement. He shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. Yeah, I guess. Emma, 21 and dressed in what looked like designer clothes, a stark contrast to my travel wrinkled outfit, stood with her arms crossed. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless. Her expression made it clear she wasn't happy to see me. The hostility radiating from her was almost tangible. So you're actually staying, she said, not bothering to make it sound like a question. Her eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. Emma, Mom warned, her voice carrying that familiar maternal edge. What? It's not like it's a secret she's moving in. I had to spend all day moving my stuff to that tiny back room. She glared at me as if I'd personally designed the house with inadequate guest rooms just to spite her. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that she was barely an adult. It's good to see you too, Emma. Dinner that night was tense. We sat around the dining table that Dad had made, one of the few original pieces of furniture that remained. Robert talked about his job at the local bank, his voice droning on about interest rates and new account promotions. Jason mumbled responses when directly addressed, his attention mostly focused on his phone under the table. Emma picked at her food while glaring at me occasionally. So, Robert said eventually, setting down his fork with a deliberate clank against the plate. How long do you think you'll be staying? I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. I'm not staying. I'm moving back. This is my permanent home now. Robert exchanged a glance with Mom. Right, of course. It's just that we've gotten used to certain arrangements around here. I'm sure we can all adjust, I said evenly, though I could feel tension building at the base of my neck. I'll be working full-time at the Albany branch, so I'll be out of the house during the day. I had to give up the big room because of you, Emma blurted out. I've been using it for 2 years, and now I'm crammed into that closet of a guest room. I had everything set up, my desk, my vanity, all my things. The room fell silent. I waited for Mom or Robert to say something, to remind Emma that it was my house and my room, but they remained silent, looking uncomfortable. Actually, I said slowly, the words forming carefully as I set down my wine glass. This entire house belongs to me. Dad left it to me in his will, so technically, I could choose any room I want. No, this is Emma stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled. Her face flushed with anger. I had everything set up in that room for college, my desk, my vanity, everything. And now I'm supposed to cram it all into a room half the size because Princess April decided to grace us with her presence? She stormed out, slamming her door so hard the dishes rattled. Mom gave me a reproachful look. Did you have to antagonize her? I stared at her in disbelief, the unfairness of her accusation striking me like a physical blow. I antagonized her? She's the one who started complaining the minute I walked in the door. Mom's expression hardened, lines deepening around her mouth. Let's not do this tonight. You're tired from the drive. Things will look better tomorrow. But things didn't look better the next day, or the day after that. I started my new job, throwing myself into learning the ropes at the Albany branch. It was smaller than the Boston office, but the work was familiar, and I quickly established myself. Michael had put in a good word for me, and my reputation had preceded me. I reconnected with a few high school friends who were still in the area, including my best friend from senior year, Megan Collins, who now worked as a nurse at the local hospital. The birthday conflict. 2 weeks after I moved back, I came home from work to find Emma decorating the living room with streamers and balloons. The place looked like a party supply store had exploded. Pink and gold decorations hung from every possible surface, transforming the living room I barely recognized into something even more foreign. What's all this? I asked, setting down my laptop bag and kicking off my heels. My feet ached after a long day of meetings at the Albany branch. My birthday party, she replied without looking at me. She continued to hang a string of fairy lights around the window frame, pointedly ignoring my presence. That's cool. Should I get you a gift or something? I tried for politeness, though the last thing I wanted to do was shop for my sulky stepsister, who had made it clear she resented my very existence in the house. Emma snorted, turning to face me with arms crossed. No need. You won't be here. Excuse me? The casual dismissal caught me off guard. Mom appeared from the kitchen, looking nervous. She wiped her hands on a dish towel repeatedly, a habit she developed when anxious. April, honey, can I talk to you for a minute? She led me to the back porch where we used to sit and watch the sunset when I was a kid. Now it was cluttered with Robert's tools and gardening equipment. The wooden swing where Dad and I used to rock while counting stars was gone. In its place stood a weathered workbench covered in half-finished projects. Emma's having some friends over for her birthday. On Saturday, Mom twisted her hands together, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. She was hoping to have the house to herself for the evening. I stared at her, the realization of what she was asking slowly dawning on me. Are you actually asking me to leave my own house for Emma's party? Just for a few hours. Mom's voice took on a pleading tone. You could go to a movie or have dinner with Megan. Emma's been planning this for weeks, and all her college friends are coming. Are you kidding me, Mom? This is my house. I felt anger rising in my chest like a tide. I'm not going to be kicked out for a birthday party I wasn't even invited to. Please, don't make this difficult, Mom pleaded, her eyes darting nervously toward the house as if worried Emma might overhear. Things have been tense enough since you moved back. And whose fault is that? You all act like I'm intruding when I'm the one who owns this place. The words came out harsher than I intended, but weeks of feeling unwelcome had worn my patience thin. Mom's face fell, her shoulders slumping slightly. I thought you might do this as a favor to me. That hurt. After everything I'd compromised on, she was still asking for more. I stood up, brushing off my work slacks. I won't make a scene at Emma's party. I'll stay in my room, but I'm not leaving. Mom looked disappointed but nodded. I'll let Emma know. At dinner that night, Emma made her displeasure known. She pushed her food around her plate, radiating hostility across the table. I guess I'll just have to move my party to Lucano, she announced dramatically, her fork clattering against her plate. Since some people, she glared at me, won't compromise. I bit my tongue, focused on my plate, and said nothing. Robert muttered something about the cost of restaurant parties, and Jason, as usual, looked bored with the whole situation, his eyes never leaving his phone. You know how expensive that place is, Robert said, frowning at Emma. We've already bought all the decorations and food for here. Well, I'm not canceling my party just because she won't leave for one night. Emma's voice rose, her cheeks flushing with anger. No one asked you to cancel, I finally said, setting down my fork carefully. I said I'd stay in my room. Like that's not totally weird and creepy, Emma shot back. Having some old lady lurking upstairs while we're trying to have fun. I almost laughed at being called an old lady at 42, but the genuine disdain in her voice stung more than I cared to admit. On Saturday, Emma and her friends went to Lucano for her birthday. The house was blissfully quiet, and I spent the evening in my pajamas watching movies in the living room and enjoying having the place to myself for the first time since moving back. I felt a peace in my own home that had eluded me since my return, sinking into the couch with a glass of wine and allowing myself to relax fully. For a few hours, I could imagine this was truly my space again. In the quiet, I could almost hear the echoes of Dad's laugh, could almost see him coming in from the garage with sawdust in his hair, eager to show me his latest project. Settling in, life settled into an uncomfortable routine over the next few months. I went to work, came home, and tried to avoid conflict with my housemates. It was hard to think of them as family anymore. Most evenings, I'd eat dinner quickly and retreat to my room or go out with Megan or other friends I'd reconnected with at work. They're treating you like a tenant, not a homeowner, Megan said one evening as we shared a bottle of wine at her place. She'd divorced her husband 2 years ago and was raising their 7-year-old daughter alone. The struggles had given her a directness I appreciated. It's completely backwards. Tell me about it, I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. But what can I do? Start charging them rent? Megan raised an eyebrow. It's your house, April. Maybe you should. I laughed it off then, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. Things were going well professionally, at least. My boss in Albany appreciated my experience from the Boston office, and I was already being considered for a team lead position. The commute wasn't bad, and I enjoyed the familiar scenery of my hometown. Sometimes on my lunch breaks, I'd drive past my old high school or the park where Dad used to take me fishing. These small reconnections to my past brought comfort, a reminder of who I was beyond the strained dynamics at home. One evening in late summer, I came home to find Mom and Robert sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers in front of them. They looked up when I walked in, and something about their expressions made me pause. Robert's jaw was set in a hard line, while Mom wouldn't quite meet my eyes. April, Mom said, her voice oddly formal. We need to talk to you. I set down my purse and laptop bag slowly, a knot forming in my stomach. Is everything okay? Did something happen? Mom slid some papers toward me. Utility bills, I realized as I glanced at them. Electric, water, heating, all with higher totals than I remembered from childhood. We need to discuss the financial situation here, Mom said, her fingers fidgeting with her wedding band. What about it? I remained standing, not wanting to sit and give this impromptu meeting more formality than it deserved. Robert cleared his throat. Since you moved back, our expenses have increased significantly. Water, electricity, heating, it's all gone up. He tapped the bills with a manicured finger. These are just from the last month. I contribute to the grocery fund, I reminded them. I give you $300 every month, remember? That's more than my share of the food. Mom and Robert exchanged a look that sent a chill through me. That's just for food, Mom said. It doesn't cover the other expenses. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What are you saying? We think it would be fair if you paid rent, Robert stated bluntly. $1,000 a month. The words hit me like a slap. Are you serious? My voice rose in disbelief. This is my house. Dad left it to me. I'm the one who should be charging rent if anyone is. Robert's face hardened, his thin lips pressing together. Now listen here, young lady, we've been maintaining this house for 8 years while you were off living your life in Boston. We've paid the property taxes, fixed the roof, replaced the water heater. I never asked you to do any of that. I shot back, heat rising to my face. And I offered multiple times to help with major expenses, but Mom always said you had it covered. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to back me up, to say something in my defense. Instead, she looked away, her lips pressed together in a thin line, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Mom, I said, my voice smaller now, hurt seeping through the anger. You can't seriously expect me to pay rent for my own house. If you can't contribute financially, Robert said coldly, then perhaps you should find somewhere else to live. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to Mom again, sure she would object to her husband telling her daughter to leave her own home. But she just nodded slightly, agreeing with him. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Without another word, I left the room, grabbing my purse and keys on the way out. I drove around town for hours, past all the landmarks of my childhood. The school, the park, the ice cream shop where Dad used to take me after softball games. Eventually, I ended up at Megan's place, pouring out the whole story as her daughter slept upstairs. They want me to pay rent. For my own house. I was pacing her living room, anger and hurt churning inside me. And Mom just sat there and let Robert threaten to kick me out if I don't pay. Megan's expression had grown increasingly incredulous as I spoke. That's completely ridiculous. You own the house, April. They're the ones who should be paying you rent. Her words stopped me mid-pace. What? You heard me. They've been living in your house for free for 8 years. If anyone should be paying rent, it's them. She took a sip of her tea, watching as the idea took root in my mind. I returned home after midnight, slipping quietly into the house. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process what had just happened. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were deafening. Sleep eluded me that night. The confrontation. By morning, I had moved from shock to anger. I'd spent half the night researching property laws and speaking with Megan, who had gone through something similar with her ex-husband's family. I dressed for work mechanically, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming when I went downstairs for breakfast. The whole family was already there. Mom was at the stove, flipping pancakes as if it were any normal morning. Robert sat behind his newspaper, occasionally peering over the top to check his phone. Jason slouched over his cereal, headphones firmly in place, while Emma sipped her coffee, scrolling through social media on her phone. She looked up with a smirk that told me she knew exactly what had happened the night before. So, she said sweetly as I poured a cup of coffee, her voice dripping with false innocence. When are you going to start paying rent, or are you moving out? Something inside me snapped. The coffee mug made a sharp sound as I set it down on the counter. I turned to face all of them, my heart pounding but my voice surprisingly steady. Actually, I've made a decision. All eyes turned to me. The kitchen fell silent except for the sizzle of the pancake on the griddle. This house belongs to me, I said, my voice calm and clear despite the rage boiling inside. It was left to me by my father. Everyone else here lives in this house because I allow it. Robert started to interrupt, his face reddening, but I held up my hand. Starting next month, I'll be implementing a new arrangement. Each of you, Mom, Robert, Emma, and Jason, will pay $500 a month in rent. That's $2,000 total. A stunned silence fell over the kitchen. Emma's mouth hung open in shock, her phone forgotten in her hand. Jason had pulled his headphones down, suddenly interested in family drama for the first time since I'd returned. You're joking, Mom finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The spatula hung forgotten in her hand as the pancake began to burn. I'm absolutely serious. I took a sip of my coffee, oddly calm in the face of their outrage. Consider it the market rate for the area, split 4 ways. It's actually quite reasonable. You can't charge us rent. Emma shrieked, her coffee sloshing as she slammed her mug down. You're insane. I turned to her, meeting her furious gaze steadily. If you don't like the terms, you're welcome to find another place to live. I'm sure there are plenty of rental properties in Pinewood. You would throw out your own mother? Robert demanded, standing up to tower over me. His newspaper crumpled in his fist, his face flushed with anger. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated in my own home. No, I would charge my mother and her family a fair rent for a property they don't own. After everything we've done for you, Mom said, her voice trembling. She turned off the stove, the burnt smell of the pancake filling the kitchen. We've maintained this house, paid all the bills, and now you want to charge me rent for my own property? I cut in, the irony almost making me laugh. How is that any different from what I'm proposing? I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Think it over. Let me know what you decide. The drive to work was a blur. Part of me couldn't believe what I'd just done, but another part, a stronger part, knew it was long overdue. They'd pushed me too far, and something had to give. That night, I picked up takeout on the way home and ate in my room. No one spoke to me. The next day was the same, and the day after that. I'd become a ghost in my own house, ignored by everyone, even my mother. 2 weeks of icy silence passed. I bought my own groceries and kept them separate in the fridge. I did my laundry when no one else was around. I missed my mother, but I wouldn't back down, not this time. I spent evenings with Megan or catching up with other old friends who were still in town. I focused on work, earning recognition for streamlining several processes at the Albany branch. But at home, the silence was deafening. The decision finally, on a Sunday afternoon, Mom and Robert cornered me in the living room as I was reading. The tension in the room was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. We've made a decision, Robert announced stiffly, his posture rigid as he stood beside the couch where I sat. He didn't sit down, maintaining his position of apparent authority. And I closed my book, marking my place with a finger, my heart beating a little faster despite my outward calm. We're moving out. The words hung in the air. We found an apartment on the other side of town. I nodded slowly, a mix of emotions washing over me. Relief that the tension would finally end, sadness that it had come to this, and a lingering anger that they, especially my mother, had put me in this position in the first place. When? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Next weekend, Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. She seemed smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched slightly as she stood half a step behind Robert. We've already signed the lease. I'm taking what I paid for, Robert added, his tone challenging, eyes narrowed as if expecting me to protest. The washing machine, the dishwasher, the TV in the living room. That's fine. I cut him off, unwilling to engage in a petty argument over appliances. Take whatever you bought. The next week was filled with the sounds of packing and moving. Emma made a point of slamming doors and drawers whenever I was nearby, her resentment radiating like heat. Jason mostly kept to himself, though I occasionally caught him watching me with an unreadable expression. Once, he asked if he could come back to use the fishing gear in the garage sometime. I said yes, of course. Mom barely spoke to me, focusing instead on organizing and packing. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, watching her choose Robert and his children over me so definitively. The few times our paths crossed in the kitchen or hallway, the weight of unspoken words hung between us like a physical barrier. On Friday night, Robert rented a moving truck. I stayed out of the way as they loaded furniture and boxes. Some of the items they took were definitely purchases my father had made, the dining table, some of the kitchen appliances, but I didn't have the energy to fight about it anymore. They were just things, and I could replace them. When they were nearly finished, I noticed them trying to maneuver the old grandfather clock that had been my father's pride and joy out the front door. It had stood in our entryway for as long as I could remember, its gentle ticking a soundtrack to my childhood. Dad had lovingly maintained it, teaching me how to wind it properly when I was old enough. That stays, I said firmly, stepping into the hallway, my voice breaking the silence that had persisted for days. Robert frowned, his hands still on the clock's wooden frame. I paid to have it repaired 3 years ago. It wasn't working when your father died. The clock was my dad's. My voice caught slightly on the words. He bought it from an antique shop the year I was born. He used to let me help wind it every Sunday night. It stays. The memory of those quiet moments with my father gave strength to my words. For a moment, I thought Robert would argue, but Mom put a hand on his arm and shook her head slightly. Leave it, Robert. It belongs to April. They moved away from the clock, and I found myself standing protectively beside it, my hand resting on its polished wood, feeling the faint vibration of its mechanism inside. As they were making their final trip to the truck, Mom lingered behind in the kitchen. I followed her there, watching as she ran her fingers along the countertop where she'd taught me to bake cookies. I never thought it would end like this, she said quietly, her voice laden with regret. Neither did I replied, leaning against the doorframe, unwilling to cross the distance between us. Mom looked away, her gaze fixed on the backyard visible through the window. I thought you'd be reasonable. Reasonable? I echoed, incredulity creeping into my voice. Was it reasonable to let Emma treat me like an intruder? Was it reasonable to ask me to leave my own house for her birthday? Was it reasonable to side with your husband over your daughter at every turn? Robert has been good to me, April, she said, a defensive edge to her voice. He took care of us after your father died. He moved into my house and acted like he owned it, and you let him. The words came out harsher than I intended, but years of hurt bubbled to the surface. Did you ever once remind him that this was Dad's house? That he left it to me? Mom sighed heavily, finally turning to look at me. I can see we're not going to agree on this. I should go. They're waiting for me. She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the frame. For a moment, I thought she might say something more, apologize, maybe, or acknowledge the pain we caused each other. But she simply nodded and left, the screen door closing softly behind her. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the sound of the moving truck starting up, then pulling away. With it went my mother, the last living connection to my childhood. Goodbye, Mom, I whispered to the empty room. A new beginning, the house, which had felt crowded and hostile for months, was suddenly achingly empty. That first night alone, I wandered from room to room, taking stock of what remained and what I would need to replace. The living room was missing its couch and TV. The kitchen lacked a microwave and coffee maker. 3 of the bedrooms were now empty, stripped of beds and dressers. But instead of feeling sad or lonely, I felt a strange sense of peace washing over me. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, listening to the rhythmic ticking of Dad's grandfather clock, the heartbeat of the house. This was my house, really mine now, in a way it hadn't been since my father died. I could do whatever I wanted with it, fill it with my own choices, make it a home again. I got it back, Dad, I whispered, imagining he could hear me. The ticking of the clock seemed to answer. The next day, I drove to the nearest home goods store and bought a new couch, a coffee maker, and basics for the kitchen. I ordered a bed frame online and scheduled delivery of a new mattress over the weekend. I deep cleaned every room, opening windows to let fresh air circulate through the house. The physical work was therapeutic, scrubbing away years of tension along with the dust. I found some of Dad's old things in the attic, his fishing gear, photo albums, the wooden toolbox he'd made. Items I thought had been thrown away or given to Goodwill. Discovering these treasures was like finding pieces of him I thought were lost forever. I brought them down, giving them places of honor throughout the house. On Monday, I returned to work with a lighter heart. My coworkers noticed the change. You seem different, my manager commented during our morning briefing, more relaxed. I smiled. I am. Things have settled at home. Megan came over that evening to see the new arrangements. She whistled as she walked through the half-empty rooms. Wow, they really cleaned you out, huh? Yep, but now I get to start fresh, make it mine again. She helped me arrange the new furniture and hung some photographs I'd framed, pictures of my dad and me fishing, of high school graduation, of the friends I'd made in Boston. Do you regret it? She asked as we sat on my new couch, drinking wine from coffee mugs because I hadn't replaced the glassware yet. I thought about it for a moment. No, I miss my mom, and I wish things had turned out differently, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Your dad would be proud of you, Megan said, raising her mug in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my mug against hers. Over the next few weeks, I gradually transformed the house. I painted the walls colors I loved, replaced the formal dining set with a cozy breakfast nook, and turned one of the empty bedrooms into a home office. Another became a reading room, with bookshelves and a comfortable armchair by the window. My birthday came in early October. I didn't expect to hear from Mom, but the silence still stung. I checked my phone throughout the day, hoping for at least a text, but nothing came. Aunt Susan called to wish me happy birthday and awkwardly mentioned that she'd seen Mom and Robert at the grocery store. and they seemed to be doing well. She didn't even ask about me, did she? I said, the hurt evident in my voice despite my attempt to sound casual. Aunt Susan's hesitation was answer enough. Give her time, April. She's stubborn, just like you. That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, looking at the stars the way Dad and I used to. I'd replaced the old porch swing, hanging a new one in the exact spot where the original had been. The gentle rocking motion was soothing, familiar. I miss you, Dad, I said to the night sky. I wish you could see the house now. I think you'd like what I've done with it. I don't communicate with my mother or her family now. They didn't tell me their new address, and I haven't asked for it. Mom didn't even call on my birthday, which hurt, but it showed me clearly where her priorities lie. With Robert and his children, not with me. I hear from relatives that they're doing fine, and that's enough for me. I live alone in my house now, but I don't feel lonely. For the first time in years, I feel at peace. The promotion at work came through, giving me the team lead position. I've started fishing again at the small lake where Dad taught me, and sometimes I take Megan's daughter with me, teaching her what Dad taught me. This is my home, and I've reclaimed it. The grandfather clock still ticks in the entryway, marking the seconds of my new life. Whatever the future holds, I know I made the right choice in standing up for myself. Dad would have been proud.